Thank you for joining us for today's event, hosted by the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. I'm Ambassador Eric Edelman, Chair of FDD's Turkey Program. Today's discussion comes at a time of enormous crisis with Vladimir Putin's unprovoked, premeditated war of aggression against Ukraine and indiscriminate Russian attacks on innocent civilians there. These are war crimes. At the same time, the diplomatic map of the Middle East may be shifting yet again. Israeli President Isaac Herzog is slated to visit Turkey in the coming days, making it the first visit by an Israeli president to Turkey since 2007. While I served as U.S. ambassador to Turkey in the early 2000s, I witnessed firsthand the early warning signs of the risks posed by the rise of the Islamo-Nationalist Justice and Development Party, the AKP, to power. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's subsequent consolidation of one-man rule has turned Ankara into a far more difficult and challenging partner for America and the West. Erdogan's anti-Semitic vitriol and support for and patronage of Hamas has caused a major strain in Turkish-Israeli relations over the last decade. Turkey not only hosts Hamas headquarters in Istanbul, but has also granted citizenship and passports to senior Hamas operatives. But their relationship has not always been so fraught. Turkey was the first Muslim-majority country to welcome and recognize the State of Israel in 1949, following its independence, and the two countries have shared close ties for decades. As a new regional paradigm emerged after the Cold War, Ankara and Jerusalem enjoyed close diplomatic security and intelligence cooperation during the 1990s. Erdogan's outreach efforts to normalize relations between Ankara and Jerusalem today stem from his own personal domestic political interests. He's looking for new partners as Turkey faces a collapsing economy, rising opposition to his rule, conflict with Arab neighbors as well as traditional Western allies, and now the specter of unprovoked Russian aggression in his neighborhood. This backdrop of tense domestic and foreign policy issues is occurring in the run-up to Turkey's 2023 presidential and parliamentary elections. As Erdogan and the AKP work to retain their hold on power, their diplomatic overtures to Israel and their Arab neighbors all fit within the ambit of their broader goal, making Turkey the leading Islamic power in the Middle East. In this context, and with the future of Turkish-Israeli relations in the balance, we're glad to be joined by an expert lineup with decades of experience covering Turkey and Israel to discuss these timely issues. Eytan Cohen Yanarocak is a researcher at Tel Aviv University's Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies, where he serves as co-editor of Turkeyscope. He's also a Turkey analyst at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Aykan Erdemir, my colleague at FDD, is senior director of FDD's Turkey program. Aykan previously served as a member of the Turkish parliament, including on an EU-Turkey Joint Parliamentary Committee and the EU Harmonization Committee. He also serves on the Anti-Defamation League's Task Force on Middle East Minorities. Gallia Lindenstrauss is a senior research fellow at the Institute for National Strategic Studies, specializing in Turkish foreign policy. Her analysis frequently appears in major Israeli and international media outlets. And finally, my colleague Enia Krivine is a senior director of FDD's Israel Program and National Security Network. She'll be moderating today's conversation. Prior to joining FDD, Enia worked at AIPAC, the Israel Allies Foundation, at the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and on several political campaigns. Before I turn the floor over to Enia and the panelists, I'd like to say a few words about FDD. FDD is a nonpartisan research institute exclusively focused on national security and foreign policy. FDD is a source for timely research analysis and policy options. FDD takes no foreign government or foreign corporate funding. For more information on our work and on our Turkey and Israel programs, visit us at fdd.org or find us on Twitter at FDD. Thank you again for joining us for this critical and timely event. And with that, over to you, Enia, to start today's conversation.
Thank you, Eric, for that impactful introduction and for your service to our country. Eric's remarks give crucial context on the history of Israeli-Turkish relations and Erdogan's recent diplomatic overtures to Israel ahead of President Herzog's visit to Turkey. Let's jump straight into the discussion with our panelists today. So Gallia, I'll start with you. If we look back to a time before Erdogan, can you highlight some of the win-wins of the Turkish-Israeli relationship?
So when we look at Turkey and its west coast, there's all these wonderful all-inclusive resorts. And I would define Israel-Turkish relations in the 1990s as all-inclusive. We cooperated in so many matters. If it was intelligence sharing, if it was defense procurement that Turkey bought from Israel, we had a free trade agreement signed in 1996. Of course, there was also tourism. It was really everything. We got everything from each other. It was also the Oslo days, and we know that there is a correlation between developments in the Israeli-Palestinian arena and how good Turkish-Israeli relations are. And so this was also very helpful for this honeymoon years in Turkish-Israeli relations. We had Syria as a joint enemy in these days, so much so that it's interesting to say that when Israel and Syria were in peace talks in the mid-1990s, Turkey didn't like it. 10 years later, Turkey was one of the, it mediated it between Israel and Syria. But in the 1990s, it was not good that Israel was moving to peace with Syria. So this was the contest. And that's when Erdogan came to power.
So since Erdogan came to power and the AKP's party, how have Israeli-Turkish relations been challenged?
So the relationship didn't change immediately. Actually, in the first term of office, Erdogan maintained this relationship. Maybe it was because he was fearful of the army. He was still not secure enough, and the army was very much pushing this relationship forward. Maybe it was because the peace process was still alive, and so that was also beneficial to keeping the relationship intact. And he even visited Israel in 2005 in light of Israel's disengagement for Gaza. We have him visiting for the first and only time in Israel. And as I said, as a twist of irony, he even mediated himself between Israel and Syria in indirect talks.
Interesting. Aykan, let's go to you. After years of anti-Semitic and anti-Israel vitriol, which you've written about extensively, and after Erdogan joined Iran and Hamas in condemning the Abraham Accords, why is Erdogan now reaching out to Israel for normalization? Why the U-turn?
Thank you, Enia, for having me. Now, there's a complex mix of domestic and international factors, including economic, diplomatic, and security factors that pushed Erdogan to take such a step. I said Erdogan and not Turkey to clarify the agency here. Let's not fool ourselves. In Erdogan's Turkey, where political power is hyper-centralized in one person and the presidential office, if Erdogan was not 100% behind this initiative, it wouldn't have happened. Yes, there must have been influencers, particularly within Turkey's security establishment, to push for normalization, to encourage Erdogan to take a step, but ultimately the Turkish president has the final say here. And another important prelude, is this a one-off initiative or part of a wider set of initiatives? I would argue it's the latter. Turkey's outreach to Israel comes on the heels of Ankara's outreach to Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. One could even argue that Turkey's outreach to Armenia, to some extent, results from similar motivations. In January, Erdogan started referring to a new concept in Turkish foreign policy called sorunsuz çember, the problem-free circle. Turkey's pro-government media reported that the key driving factor for this was the belief that foreign policy will offer solutions to Turkey's problems at home, namely the economic crisis and the growing social and political discontent. This new approach was later interpreted in pro-government media outlets as a move to desecuritize Turkey's foreign policy agenda. A pro-government pundit talked about the risks of economically driven popular protests and Ankara becoming tired of maintaining unended conflicts and armed confrontations in the Middle East and North Africa. So it seems Erdogan is rebranding zero problems with neighbors, which is mostly associated with Ahmet Davutoğlu, his former ally and colleague turned a political rival. But Erdogan's U-turn in foreign policy and his taking a respite from hyper-belligerent foreign and security policy goes back at least a year, and it is not a full circle, I would argue. because Turkey is increasingly troubled by its unprecedented isolation in the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean particularly. Ankara watches with concern the East Med Gas Forum and the new diplomatic and security partnerships emerging among Israel, Greece, Cyprus, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia, and wants to disrupt this by isolating Greece and Cyprus. Israel is keenly aware of this move, and Herzog's March 2nd visit to Cyprus and his Greece visit the next day, and Israeli officials' repeated statements that normalization with Turkey does not come at the expense of Israel's relations with Greece and Cyprus shows Jerusalem's understanding of these dynamics. Furthermore, Erdogan hopes that these normalization initiatives will also help repair Turkey's image in Washington and Brussels, and some of the arms export restrictions, namely Turkey's inability to upgrade its air force by purchasing F-35s, a new generation of F-16s or F-16 upgrade kits, are a growing concern in Ankara. So Erdogan, I would argue, quite naively hopes that normalization with Israel and others can offer a quick fix to his troubles in the United States and the European Union. But ultimately, let's not fool ourselves. The key driving factor here is Erdogan's political survival instincts in the run-up to the most challenging elections he will ever face since the rise of his Islamist-rooted Justice and Development Party to power in 2002. And this is particularly significant because the opposition is more united than ever. They defeated Erdogan in the 2019 municipal elections, and recently they just united forces to establish what they call an enhanced parliamentary system and end Erdogan's executive presidential system. Now, a quick question here is, will Erdogan's diplomatic stunts offer any remedy for Turkey's economic troubles and reverse Erdogan's electoral fortunes or misfortunes? I've been a pessimist when it comes to Turkey's economic trajectory, and time has proven me right again and again. Turkey's inflation hit 50% last month. Turkey's net international reserves, excluding swap deals, is around negative $60 billion. And last month, Turkey's trade deficit climbed 142% to $60 billion. So I think these are the key drivers. But let me end here with a key foreign and security driver, namely the elephant in the room, the ongoing US-Iran talks and concerns about Tehran's hegemony, not only in Turkey, but also elsewhere in the Middle East. And these are pushing these former adversaries toward one another. Yes, I know Erdogan has always played a double game with Iran, helping Tehran evade US sanctions to the tune of $20 billion at the height of US sanctions, thereby bailing the Iranian regime out when it was close to bankruptcy. And this results from the ideological affinities Erdogan shares with Tehran, despite the sectarian differences between the two nations. But at the same time, Erdogan knows that beyond their shared disdain for the Western-led international order, he and his Iranian counterparts are rivals competing for hegemony in the Middle East. And Israel here is the obvious counterweight Erdogan can tap into.
That's an interesting point. Hi, let's talk about Israeli foreign policy for a second. So
sure.
Abraham Accords signed in September 2020 were harshly criticized in Ankara, with Erdogan publicly condemning them and expressing his support for the Palestinians, who were perceived by many to have been largely left behind by the normalization agreements. You've made comments previously that following the Abraham Accords, Israel is no longer the isolated Middle Eastern state it used to be, and Israel now enjoys unprecedented diplomatic maneuvering capabilities. Can you spend a couple of minutes expanding on that idea for us?
Sure. First of all, thank you very much for having me here. From my perspective, the most important issue here, the architect of this, the architect of the normalization, in my opinion, is Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan of the United Arab Emirates. Recently, we have seen that Mohammed bin Zayed paid a visit in Ankara, and there he declared $10 billion of investment. In my perspective, by investing such a huge money into the Turkish economy, Mohammed bin Zayed bought the tendency of the Turkish foreign policy and in this regard, he's expecting the Turks to mend their fences, not only with Israel, but also with Egypt, also with Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And the common denominator of all these states are their negative stance against the Muslim Brotherhood movement. We all know that because of this deterioration of relations between Egypt and Turkey, Turkey became a hub for the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood movement. And also since the Gilad Shalit deal, we know that Hamas's terrorist cells are also inside Turkey. So Israel is trying to increase its influence by using all of these regional balances as a leverage. Israel is multiplying its own power influence thanks to this Abraham Accords and thanks to the Egyptian, Saudi Arabian, and the Emirati pressures on Ankara. Israel can come to the table with the Turkish decision makers, and we can tell them, yes, we are willing to normalize our relations with Turkey, but this time with a condition: we want Hamas out of Turkey. And in my opinion, the second important component here, of course, is the devaluation of the Turkish economy. Mr. Erdogan gravely needs to shake hands of to shake the hands of a Western leader. In this regard, I guess Mr. Herzog, our president, will be a very good photo for him. Because I would like to give you a concrete example again. Approximately a month ago, Erdogan was infected with COVID-19, and no Western leader even called him to say get well soon. So with this kind of a picture with Mr. Herzog, basically Mr. Erdogan is trying to attract the foreign investors, European foreign investors, back into Turkey. And of course, let us not forget also the Eastern Mediterranean dimension. By launching this normalization with Israel, Turkey is seeking to destroy the axis of Israel, Greece, and Cyprus. This alliance is crucial for the state of Israel. These two states are members of the European Union, and at last we have regional allies that we are thinking alike. So in terms of the Turkish political perspective, of course, Greece and Cyprus are considered as national security threats for Turkey. And ironically speaking, Turkey was the core architect here of this trilateral alliance against itself. And last but not the least, in Turkish point of view, I think this normalization was launched to mend the fences with the United States. If you like, I can come to that later.
Thank you. Gallia, do you want to weigh in here?
Yes, I just want to add that when we look backwards on what happened from the second term of office in Erdogan and why relations deteriorated, then we know the obvious, like that there was the flotilla, and we know that Erdogan got domestic dividends from being very critical on Israel, and he wanted regional clout, and it was also good to fight with Israel in this regard. But I think the less obvious point is that Israel and Turkey shared less interests, had less shared interest in the 21st century. If I go to Syria, before the Syrian civil war, then Turkey and Syria were best friends. And even after the Syrian civil war started, Turkey is interested in what is happening in the north, and we are interested in what is happening in the south. So it didn't translate into a shared interest. In terms of defense equipment, if once Turkey bought from Israel, now Turkey is manufacturing for itself. It doesn't need Israel the way it did. As Aykan and Hai mentioned, there's the issue of whether Israel is a lobby for some points from Turkey, but Turkey felt mostly secure in these 20 years, and it didn't feel like it needed Israel. And most importantly, I think Turkey became a revisionist power. And in this respect, that's the main point why Israel and Turkey had a hard time to cooperate, because Israel, at the end of the day, is a status quo power and is comfortable with status quo powers. Once Turkey became more and more revisionist, and also was more open to other revisionist actors in the system, like Iran, for example, then it became more difficult for Israel and Turkey to cooperate.
So Gallia, let's stay with you. Where do you see the greatest potential for advancing bilateral relations this year between Israel and Turkey?
So I think a good case for comparison is what happened after the 2016 normalization agreement between Israel and Turkey. And then we saw that in 2017, there was definitely good vibes. And when I interviewed some senior official at the time, he said that relations are going forward better than he expected. But then came 2018 and the US moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and there was this diplomatic crisis between Turkey. So we know, I think we can take from that in the short term, if we have a presidential visit and the return of ambassadors, this will give a boost to relations. But any deterioration in the Israeli-Palestinian context, again, will go back to square one in Turkey-Israeli relations. I think, however, also the situation in Ukraine will influence whatever things unwrap in Ukraine. And I have to say, between Israel and Turkey, there is no conflict of interest in the bilateral level. Our arguments are about things that relate to third parties. So in this respect, I think the situation in Ukraine is causing all the states to think, what are our core security interests? What is really important to us? And in this respect, I think the Ukrainian crisis does provide the context for a more meaningful cooperation between Israel and Turkey. So this is in the next 2 years. In the long run, I think, as Aykan said, Herzog visited Athens and Nicosia before going to Turkey. He highlighted very correctly, in my view, the issue of climate change in his visits. I think this is where really Israel, Turkey, Greece, Cyprus should cooperate. And whether they do it through the East Med gas forum, if they expand it both in substance and also becoming more inclusive, because today Turkey is not in the East Med gas forum, or they make a new forum for climate issues. I think that's an issue that really we can see great cooperation. And I'll end with an anecdote. In the 1990s, it was discussed that Turkey would export water to Israel. This didn't materialize, we won't get into it, but today, Turkey is a water-stressed country. It just can't afford to export water. The only solution to this issue is water management and desalination. And for this, you need energy. You can't do desalination if you don't have enough energy. So these countries will have to cooperate because they're all really suffering from climate change more than other countries around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's shift gears and turn to Erdogan's troubling patronage of Hamas. Hamas has headquarters in Istanbul, and Erdogan has enjoyed close ties with the terrorist organization for years. Ankara's support of Hamas has been a major source of contention in Israeli-Turkish relations. What changes does Israel need to see in this department for normalization between the two countries to go forward?
First of all, we would like to understand that Turkey provided citizenship and even residence permit to these Hamas terrorists. So, of course, Israel is monitoring about that, but we seem to we understand that there is a change in this Turkish perception, in this Turkish policy vis-a-vis Hamas. In January 2021, last year, the Times newspaper published an article, and in that particular article, it was written that Turkey began to limit Hamas militants' activities inside Turkey, and even they began to deport them to other countries. From the Israeli point of view, as far as I understand, this Turkish act did not come to a satisfactory level. Last year, again, this time in December, our foreign minister, Yair Lapid, made it very clear that Hamas's Turkey cell, unfortunately, still active, and he emphasized, in order to reach to a genuine normalization, Turkey should dismantle the Hamas cell in Turkey. So basically, in my opinion, if we are marching towards a genuine normalization with Turkey, we really would like to see the end of the Hamas's activities in Turkey. I think this is mission possible. And this should also be seen again in the framework of Turkey's bilateral relations with Hamas. With Egypt, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates.
Okay. So Aykan, let's talk about the future. Turkey is going to hold presidential and parliamentary elections in 2023. How much do these diplomatic U-turns we've seen recently represent a long-lasting strategic shift, and how much of it is purely politics?
Now, Enia, if you're asking me whether Erdogan's moves are tactical, the answer is definitely yes. I don't think any sound analyst would believe that Erdogan has gone through an intellectual or moral transformation and repented his anti-Semitic core values. He's seeking a temporary alliance to survive the next storm, just as he has earlier done with the Fethullah Gülen network, Turkey's center-right, the so-called liberaller, the Kurds, and more recently with Turkey's pro-Russia and pro-China Eurasianist factions. In general, once Erdogan overcomes the next set of challenges and consolidates power and the weather clears, he often strikes his tactical allies with great vengeance and gets back on his ideological path. Here, to give Erdogan credit, he has always provided clear signs that his offers are temporary and tactical. Within the last month, we have seen Erdogan and his spokesperson, Ibrahim Kalın, give the four-finger Muslim Brotherhood salute publicly. So if you expect Erdogan to give up the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas for good, and will resent him in the future for not doing so, it's not really Erdogan's fault. As they say, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. But by the way, I'm not saying this to minimize the importance of Erdogan's normalization initiative. It is a great opportunity for Erdogan to start undoing the damage he has caused in Turkey's foreign and security policy, especially in Ankara's relations with Israel. If Turkey's big tent opposition bloc succeeds in defeating Erdogan and his ultra-nationalist allies in the 2023 presidential and parliamentary elections you just mentioned, normalization will offer them a great foundation to build on. The fact that Erdogan himself started normalization could even help limit the pushback from Turkey's Islamist factions. The next governments can always argue that they are simply completing a process of normalization that Erdogan himself started. Of course, this is the optimistic scenario on my end. Ultimately, Erdogan is the mastermind of tilting the electoral playing field, even changing the rules of voting and counting in the middle of an election, annulling an election when things don't go the way he likes. For example, as he did with Istanbul's mayoral elections in 2019 and lost again with a greater margin. And furthermore, there are no guarantees that he will concede power if and when he loses elections. So it's a fair question to ask. What would Erdogan do if he could consolidate power again and feels he no longer needs a tactical outreach to Israel and other regional powers? Now, at that point, it wouldn't be surprising to witness yet another one of Erdogan's U-turns in foreign policy, and particularly in relations with Israel. As recent as last year, the US State Department and the US House Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism condemned Erdogan. The latter slammed his statements as being tantamount to blood libel against the Jewish people. This is a very strong language that you do not necessarily see coming from Washington that often. I wouldn't be at all surprised if I see Erdogan reverting back to his anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli vitriols overnight. But at the same time, I believe that there are enough factors at work which will motivate him to self-censor for the time being and keep his prejudices and hatred to himself, at least for the next year, at least until the elections. Ultimately, it will take long years and intense efforts to undo the damage Erdogan has done to Turkish-Israeli relations. As one Israeli official told me, diplomatic and cultural relations can bounce back rapidly in bilateral affairs. And then he added, but for security and intelligence relations to improve, you need trust. So I do not think that the level of trust is there for now. Now, Turkey's opposition has an opportunity here, though. There are robust trade relations between Turkey and Israel, despite all the ups and downs. And again, despite the alarming rise in anti-Semitism, there are significant people-to-people ties. There are also key areas of common interest in the diplomatic, security, and intelligence fields. So Turkey's next government, hopefully a democratic and pro-Western government, can build on these strengths to carry bilateral affairs to the win-win relationship of the 1990s that Gallia, overviewed, detailed very well. But Turkey's opposition, however, has to come to the realization that such a win-win relationship will not come by itself. There is a lot of work to be done at home. For Turkish-Israeli partnership to be sustainable, Turkey needs to tackle rampant anti-Semitism. The country needs a comprehensive hate crimes bill and its effective implementation. Turkey needs to revise its textbooks and tackle the anti-Semitic content on its state-funded media outlets. My colleague Hai here has great research on Turkey's textbooks, so Ankara should definitely get his help on this issue. And also Turkey's state-backed troll armies, funded by Ankara, should stop disseminating all the anti-Semitic conspiracies and all the anti-Israeli vitriol that they have been pushing 24/7. In short, the enormous resources the Erdogan government has poured into disseminating and inculcating anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli hate and prejudice should be channelized in the same volume into combating anti-Semitism and promoting people-to-people ties. If normalization remains only a high-level issue among top officials between Turkey and Israel, it will remain prone to sudden reversals. But if it leads to changes in values and outlook among the wider political elite and society at large, it has a greater potential to last and greater potential to offer, bigger dividends. So my final take is even a broken clock shows the right time twice a day. And when it comes to Erdogan, this is one of those moments when he's pointing in the right direction. And I think it's important to seize the day while it still lasts.
So let's stay here for a minute, and I'd love to hear from Gallia and Hai on this. If we look into our crystal balls, what do Israeli-Turkish relations look like if Erdogan wins in 2023, he sweeps? And what do they look like if Erdogan loses and we have a new government in Ankara? Hai, you want to start?
Well, I'm curious if there will be elections in Turkey in 2023, but that's another issue. But let me concentrate to your question. If Erdogan will win, if nothing will happen drastically, let's say if there will not be an escalation in the Gaza Strip, or if there will be not a third Lebanese-Israeli war, I assume if we will not see an improvement in the economy, in the Turkish economy, I guess in the very near future, we will see the continuation of the current status quo. But if Erdogan will lose, then we may see, again, a very slow improvement in the relations. But again, in my opinion, during the first term of the new Turkish government, so they will be more cautious and I guess they will be more concentrating into their own domestic issues, and I don't think that they will they would make important drastic steps in their foreign policy. And that is why I think if there will be a further improvement in the bilateral relations, I guess it will be only in the second term of the post-Erdogan government days.
Interesting. Gallia, do you want to weigh in on that?
I would just add that I share the skepticism voiced by Aykan. And if you would have asked me this before the war broke up with Ukraine, I would be completely in agreement with him. But again, I think the Ukraine war has so many ramifications and is really causing shaky ground to everybody to feel that along their current assumptions, that although I do think still that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and sympathy to Palestinians in Turkey is very wide, and also not just government supporters, but also in other parts of the society. And it does influence, of course, all the Turkish calculations. At the end of the day, when there will be, there's a threat to more concrete security concerns of Turkey, it will manage to brush these aside, these disagreements with Israel, and think that where it has to focus its energy on.
Hi, let's go back to you. How do you see these Turkish domestic issues that we're talking about playing into Erdogan's outreach to Jerusalem?
Erdogan, if I can already mention about my research. If you're going to look at the Turkish school textbooks, so you're gonna find lots of new content regarding Jerusalem, and we also see the Islamic discourse that we can also see in the soap operas. For instance, Abdulhamid II and his political maneuvers in order to save the empire was praised in this framework of Jerusalem. And Erdogan is trying to basically pump a consciousness. Erdogan basically is trying to create a consciousness on Jerusalem. He is doing that not only via textbooks, via soap operas, but also via NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and also governmental organizations, for instance, like TICA, that they are coming to Jerusalem and they are repairing the Palestinian property so that they will not sell their properties to Jews. Long story short, I can see that as long as these activities are going to remain in legal frames, Israel is monitoring all of these activities. But for now, Israel did not take any action against all of these Turkish actions as long as they are legal. But let me tell you frankly, Israeli establishment is monitoring this very closely.
Enia, may I just follow up with Hai's comment? Because I think he really touched on a very important topic. And he mentioned soap operas, and I'd like to expand on it because I've written on this back in 2017 for the Washington Post, and that's really one aspect of Erdogan's policy that gets overlooked, because the dissemination of hate, especially anti-Semitic hate and conspiracies, has taken a wholly new level. With the involvement of Turkey's state broadcaster, state-owned and state-run broadcaster TRT. The historical drama that Hai refers to is now available in English, in Spanish, in Arabic, and multiple languages around the world, with the title The Last Emperor. And as I exposed in my Washington Post piece, this revisionist drama promotes all sorts of anti-Jewish, anti-Christian, anti-Western conspiracies. It's a completely revisionist drama. It's all made up facts, and it simply portrays Jews, Christians, and all Westerners as conspiring evil characters or fifth columns within the Ottoman Empire, and all the Turks/Muslims who work with them also as traitors. Now, you can imagine the damage such propagation does not only within Turkey, but globally too. So I think any bilateral normalization attempt should also require that Turkey's robust state-run media empire stops disseminating hate, stops promoting hate and conspiracies, and instead puts that same energy, puts that same resource into promoting pluralism, coexistence, tolerance and understanding. We have started seeing some of this in the post-Abraham Accords period with some of the Arab countries. And I would argue that Turkey is uniquely positioned with its, movie industry, with its series, with its, strong state-run and owned media, to be at the forefront of promoting pluralism and understanding.
Interesting. Thank you. So let's move a little bit into regional dynamics, which I think are really important here. Hi, you've argued that in Turkey's eyes, the road to ameliorate ties with Washington passes through Jerusalem. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Sure. Right after Biden's ascension to power, we all witnessed in Turkish media that people were speaking about now there's a new era. Joe Biden came to power, but his relations with Israel is also as strong as Donald Trump's. Of course, in Israel, including me, many of us, we do not think this way, but in Turkey, there is a prejudice about that. And I would like to give you a concrete example. Right after Joe Biden's formation of his cabinet, we have witnessed a news piece that appeared in the Anatolian News Agency of the state-sponsored news agency of Turkey. They have written that, please let us introduce you the new cabinet of Joe Biden. Half of the cabinet is composed of Jews. So it's like, elders of Zion's and protocols of elders of Zion's style written articles are highlighting the Jewish identity of the cabinet members of the American administration. But they are, of course, ignoring the most important disagreements between our governments. But still, in Turkish eyes, they think that they need the Jewish lobby. In the past, they needed the Jewish lobby gravely because of this Armenian genocide bill. We all know that it's not a concern anymore because they were all passed both in the House of Representatives and also in the Senate. But now Turkey has another important headache, which is the F-16s, because Turkey cannot receive F-35s because of its equipment of S-400 anti-ballistic missile systems. Turkey is facing the US sanctions against it. So since it is not getting its F-35s, Turkey would like to receive F-16s instead. And in order to do that, it needs the US Congress's approval. And for such an approval, again, the Jewish lobby can act as an important player. And in this regard, I assume the Turks are also trying to use the Azerbaijani card in order to underline the common denominators between the three countries. As we all know, during the latest skirmish in Caucasia, Turkey and Israel were on the same side. They armed Azerbaijan. Both sides provided the Azeris important technologies. So given on that common denominator, as far as I understand, the Turks are seeking to use their good relations with the Azeris so that they can also persuade the Israelis. And we will see again the Israeli or Jewish lobby to act in favor of Turkey. And this is, of course, I don't know if it is implementable or not implementable. In my opinion, the Jewish lobby in the United States will not be tempted to take action only because of such a policy. I assume we would like to see here concrete actions. We would like to see a genuine normalization. Aykan already mentioned the need for a more constructive language that should be used. Unfortunately, we still see a very anti-Semitic and very anti-Israeli delegitimizing language in the Turkish media. And the vast majority of these news outlets are sponsored by the government, or they are considered as loyal to the government. Therefore, in my opinion, we should also need to put this as another secondary condition on the table as a condition for a normalization. If we would like to have a genuine normalization, we have to see the end of delegitimization attempts against the state of Israel. For instance, I would like to give you another concrete example, the Turkish school textbooks. For instance, the textbook, which is called the International Relations and the Contemporary Turkish History. Are you with me? Apologies.
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Yeah, okay. So they are explaining the concept of non-recognition by giving Israel as a case study that there are other states in the world that they are not recognizing the state of Israel. But I can give you another, for instance, I can give you another example. In Cyprus, there is a state called the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, and it is not recognized by any other state in the world other than Turkey. So these kind of concepts could be explicated, could be explained to the students not only by delegitimizing the state of Israel. And basically, I only would like to highlight that this was not the only example that I could give to you. I only provided you one example. I can show you and highlight many different examples. So long story short, we need to see the end of this anti-Israeli indoctrination via school textbooks and also via the soap operas. Soap operas are really important because the Turkish people, they do not read a lot. So when these people are coming home after work, they are turning on their TVs and they are becoming passive objectives for the governmental indoctrination. You cannot send back these people back to school because at school, when they were young students, they learned that Abdul Hamid II was an oppressor because these school textbooks then were penned by the secular governments. And now the current Islamist government of Turkey is seeking to indoctrinate the masses by using this soap opera machine.
And yeah, if I may just follow up on these very important points, I don't think Ankara is, even while it's busy trying to normalize relations with Israel, sending the right signals with the steps it's taking. And it's not just in the media field. For example, earlier this year, the Turkish parliament elected a new member to Turkey's highest court, the Constitutional Court. And Erdogan's Islamist AKP joined forces with the ultra-nationalist MHP to elect their own candidate. There were other candidates. In fact, there was a public push to elect, the first woman member to the Turkish Constitutional Court. No, the AKP and MHP joined forces and used their majority to elect another gentleman. Now, it's interesting because this gentleman, Kenan Yaşar, has a history of anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli tweets. For example, he, in a now deleted tweet, he said, Jews are such people that they will set the world on fire to cook 2 eggs. Now, this was
quotation.
This
is a quotation.
This is a direct
Erbakan.
quotation. Yes,
Erbakan
from
or Kısa Kürek.
Possibly Kısa Kürek. Yes, from
yes.
both Erdogan and his political mentor Erbakan's muse. And the issue here is, can you imagine in any democracy, in any Western democracy, where, you know, a nominee for the Constitutional Court or the Supreme Court is exposed to have tweeted some of the worst forms of anti-Semitic hate, and then still gets an easy, you know, majority vote and confirmation, and it does not necessarily, you know, come clean with it or even issue an apology. You know, I've seen the interview this new Constitutional Court judge provided after his election, and the only comment he had about this was, you know, he didn't really mean Jews, he meant Zionists. But you know, we all know that this is the typical, you know, the cover Islamists and other, you know, types of anti-Semites use to argue that no, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm anti-Zionist. It's a political issue. But I think once again, this exposes not only the contemporary forms of anti-Semitism at work, but also the significant political, legal, institutional failures on the part of Turkey when it comes to normalization. That Erdogan doesn't see a tension between his choice of a Constitutional Court judge and his outreach to Israel. And that I find really, you know, still shocking.
Thank you. So we have one more big topic that we haven't touched on yet, and I definitely want to do so before we move to the next portion of the conversation. Gulf. The Gulf has played an important role. Hai alluded to it earlier. Maybe Hai, we'll start with you. What role does the UAE in particular play in Erdogan's diplomatic overtures to Israel?
Can you please repeat your question? I couldn't hear you.
Sorry. What role does the UAE play in Erdogan's diplomatic overtures to Israel?
As I already mentioned before, I think Mohammed bin Zayed, when he visited Turkey with this huge investment, with $10 billion of investment, he bought the tendency of the Turkish foreign policy. Basically, Turkey is basically making its foreign policy compatible with the Abraham Accords axis. What I'm seeing here is all of the moderate Sunni nations, meaning United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, Palestinian Authority, and Turkey are coming together. And without declaring, these all states are making a union against Iran. This is not declared on daily basis, but let me highlight here. Turkish and Iranian interests are clashing in Iraq. The Iraqi-sponsored Hashd Shaabi, they are sponsoring and providing shelter to the PKK. And approximately 3 or 4 months ago, they launched a rocket attack against the Turkish Bashika base in northern Iraq, and they killed a Turkish soldier. And in order to lower the tension, the Turks did not retaliate. But we all know that the situation is very tense, and both of the countries, maybe they do not fight with each other since the Treaty of Zuhab Kasr Shirin, since the Ottoman Safavid times. But in fact, the tension can be felt in other theaters in the Middle East. And in this regard, I think Israel and Turkey can cooperate. We all speak about the trust-building measures. If the two countries will begin to work together, especially in Syria and Iraq together, I think this trust-building can be achieved. Another important message or case study that can be seen during the last month, if I'm not mistaken, the Turkish intelligence agency foiled an assassination attempt against an Israeli businessman inside Turkey. In my opinion, the fact that we all have heard this news from the open press channels was a message that Iran is the most important opponent and enemy of this new bilateral normalization process. This is the first thing. And second thing is the intelligence agencies, both of Israel and Turkey, they began to cooperate together so that the healthy cooperation between themselves provided the successful result of this anti-espionage mission inside Turkey. And this is again a very crucial message that the Israeli Mossad and the Turkish MIT are working together, and this cooperation finally gave its fruits when the Iranian cell was arrested by the Turkish security officials. So we should read between the lines.
Out of an interest of time, I'm going to move on. We've had a question from the press. Adam Nixon from Middle East Broadcasting poses a two-part question. And Gallia, I'm going to direct this towards you because it touches on some of the themes that you've talked about in the conversation today. Adam Nixon asks, will Russia's invasion of Ukraine embolden our adversaries? Do you see the Russian incursion into Ukraine opening up space for China to attack Taiwan, North Korea to invade South Korea, or the Iranians to further tighten their grip on the Shiite crescent? And I'll give you the second piece now. In turn, has the Abraham Accords and the Sunni allied Middle East become a new haven of stability?
I'll start from, I think the situation in Ukraine is it's unraveling. We're in the beginning. It looks like it's really a game changer. And in this respect, I think what has been is not what it's going to be. So Turkey and Israel could be in a crisis in a certain situation. But if it's a global rivalry, we're not in the same game. So here, definitely, I think there's going to be impact, but still a little bit soon to analyze it. With regard to the Sunni states, yes, these are status quo actors, and that's why Israel felt better. It was easier for Israel to cooperate with them because of the Turkish threat as a revisionist actors. So basically, Turkey started to annoy a lot of actors in the Middle East, and we started to see an anti-Turk axis from Greece in the west, through Cyprus, through Egypt, through Israel, and then Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And if Aykan is right, and these U-turns of Turkey are only tactical, then this axis will stay put in place. If, however, maybe my point on the dramatic change that Ukraine is doing also has some validity. Then if Turkey seems as more moderate, then of course the anti-Turkey axis will weaken. And but a lot of people ask me, so Israel is normalizing relations with Turkey. How does that impact Israel's relations with Greece and Cyprus? And here again, I go back to the 2016 normalization agreement, which also people were worried would impact Israel's relations with Greece and Cyprus. And we saw the other way around. This was actually the impetus for a trilateral mechanism of yearly meetings between, twice a year meetings at a trilateral level between the heads of states. And we had 8 trilateral meetings between the heads of states of Israel, Cyprus, and Greece. And it's also not, as Aykan said, it's not coincidental that before visiting Turkey, Herzog went to Greece and Cyprus.
Okay, thank you. So let's move to my favorite part of the session, which is the lightning round. I'll ask each one of you a question, and if you could do your best to respond with a one-sentence answer, we can knock out a few more questions with the short minutes we have remaining. So Gallia, I'll stay with you. Do you expect an Israel-Turkey natural gas pipeline to come into service within the next decade?
So a month ago, you would have asked me, I would say most likely no. But now with the cancellation of the Nord Stream 2, there's again, and the rise in the price of gas, there's a renewed interest in the gas in the Eastern Mediterranean. And also there might be new gas exploration. So I would say never say never.
Hi, what would be Hamas's plan B if Turkey does push them out?
I don't want to provide I don't want to give ideas to Hamas, but if I was a Hamas member, if I was a terrorist, I could go to Qatar, or maybe I could go and found a shelter in Turkey's controlled areas in Syria. I hope they will not do that, because it will still create a huge headache for the Israeli-Turkish relations.
Aykan, do you see a return to the close military and intelligence cooperation between Turkey and Israel of the 1990s?
Yes, but it will take time. That's the short answer. And a slightly longer answer is, it will, I think, ultimately depend on the moral courage, vision, and resourcefulness of Turkey's big tent opposition bloc that is in the making. You know, if they can win elections and then really take solid action, why not?
And in the spirit of the lightning round, any other 1 or 2 sentence final thoughts that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Just add an optimist note, because Aykan and I talked a lot about the TV series, and there's now this TV series in Netflix, The Club, which basically deals with a very painful period in Turkey's Jews' history of the welfare tax, and it gives a more nuanced picture on Turkey's, in general, relations with minorities. And I think that's maybe a hopeful note with very, very, very valid critiques of Aykan and I of what is happening in the media sphere.
If I would like to add a sentence here. I totally agree with you, Gallia, and I'm not trying to challenge you, but if that particular soap opera will be broadcasted in the national TV, then I'm with you. But if it will be limited in the Netflix, so unfortunately it's only for the consumption of the elite. Thank you very much. And again, apologies that I had to respond to you.
But hi, and Gallia, to again end on a positive note, Turkey's new opposition bloc, when they issued their program on February 28th, they said that Turkey's state-run media outlets will be completely restructured. So that could be the hope that that wonderful Netflix series, The Club, which I also strongly recommend, can then, you know, there can be sequels where Turkey faces its anti-Semitic and anti-Christian policies and discourses broadcasted on national TV, so that pluralism is promoted by the same outlets that for a decade or more promoted hate and intolerance.
Thank you. It's nice to end on a positive note. Thanks to all the panelists today for participating.
Thank you.
For providing your insight on these important and very timely issues. And thanks to our audience for watching. For more information on FDD and the latest analysis from our Turkey and Israel programs, we encourage you to visit fdd.org, and we hope to see you again soon.